In the vast expanse of the galaxy, humans were seen as little more than a curiosity, an odd, primitive race from a small blue planet on the fringes of a much larger and older galactic civilization. While many species had evolved over millennia, mastering advanced technologies and philosophies, humanity had only just stepped onto the interstellar stage. To the majority of the galactic elite, Earth was a backwater planet, its people seen as physically weak and intellectually inferior. In particular, the Za'Tari, a highly advanced, elegant, and telepathic alien race, held humans in low regard. The Za'Tari prided themselves on their mental acuity, physical beauty, and mastery of telepathic communication. To them, humanity appeared brutish and unevolved, their reliance on speech and physical exertion proof of their inferior evolutionary path. Stories of Earth's wars, political conflicts, and environmental struggles were passed around among the Za'Tari with bemusement, each tale reinforcing their perception that humans were ruled by emotion, greed, and violence. This perception was only strengthened by the human appearance. While many of the galaxy's species were tall, live, or adorned with unique natural features, humans seemed unremarkable by comparison. Their lack of natural armor, scales, or inherent telepathic abilities led the more advanced races to regard them as biologically underdeveloped. Their strength, while impressive in Earth's context, was laughable in the eyes of beings who could manipulate energy fields or withstand extreme environmental conditions without technological assistance. Moreover, humanity's short history of space exploration only deepened the disdain of the galactic races. Earth had only recently mastered interstellar travel, its ships and technology crude compared to the sleek, near-organic vessels of the Za'Tari and others. Humans relied heavily on cumbersome machinery, while other species had long since moved beyond such limitations, harnessing the natural energies of the universe itself. Among the younger Za'Tari, especially the women of their elite social circles, humans were a common target of mockery. The tales of their clumsiness in space, their emotional volatility, and their outdated reliance on brute force instead of intellect were common topics of conversation. They were seen as creatures tied to their base instincts, living short, tumultuous lives without ever truly understanding the deeper mysteries of existence. The announcement that a human representative would attend the upcoming Galactic Assembly on Arcadia Prime was met with laughter among the Za'Tari elite. When Captain Alex Mason arrived on Arcadia Prime, the central hub of galactic diplomacy and the seat of the prestigious Galactic Assembly, the atmosphere was charged with curiosity and skepticism. The elite members of the interstellar community had gathered for the event, representing species from across the galaxy, each boasting advanced civilizations that had long held dominion over the stars. Among them, the Za'Tari, with their imposing telepathic prowess and elegant, ethereal forms, dominated the social and political landscape. To many in attendance, the arrival of a human was little more than a sideshow, an amusing distraction in what was otherwise a grand gathering of more refined beings. As Mason's ship touched down on the grand landing platform, its design immediately caught the attention of the onlookers. Compared to the sleek, flowing vessels of the galactic powers, the human ship was utilitarian, robust, and angular, exuding a sense of raw, functional power. It was a stark contrast to the graceful, organic-looking ships that hovered nearby, their designs seamlessly integrated with advanced energy fields and materials unknown to Earth. Whispers spread among the spectators, many of them exchanging glances filled with barely concealed disdain. Captain Mason stepped out, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, his dark hair closely cropped and his posture exuding confidence. He wore the standard-issue uniform of the United Earth Space Command, a no-nonsense blend of gray and black with subtle insignias denoting his rank. His face was calm, betraying none of the anxiety that might have been expected from someone entering the heart of galactic politics for the first time. A scar ran down the left side of his jawline, a testament to his military background, though few in the audience would recognize its significance. Za'Tari nobles and officials watched from their elevated positions in the assembly hall, their expressions a mixture of amusement and curiosity. The Za'Tari women, in particular, cast lingering glances at Mason, intrigued by the stark difference between him and the members of their own species. In contrast to the tall, slender, and almost delicate appearance of the Zatari males, Mason's presence exuded a rugged strength, an aura of primal endurance that was alien to them. They couldn't help but smirk at the notion of a human standing in such a prestigious hall, among the most powerful beings in the galaxy. As Mason made his way down the steps from his ship, his boots clanged against the metallic surface, a sharp contrast to the quiet hums of the floating platforms used by many of the other species. He was accompanied by two aides, both human as well, their expressions mirroring the stoicism of their captain. Together, they made their way toward the grand entrance of the assembly, where representatives of various species stood waiting. Some nodded politely as Mason passed, while others turned their heads, barely hiding their contempt for what they saw as a lower form of life. The Zatari ambassador, a tall, silver-skinned figure named Lyrian Viacor, waited near the entrance, her arms folded in what could only be described as a posture of quiet superiority. Lyrian, like many of her people, was telepathically sensitive and could sense the emotional undercurrents of those around her. To her, Mason's mind was surprisingly calm, focused, with only faint traces of the excitement or awe she had expected. She found it odd. Humans were supposed to be impulsive, ruled by emotion, and overwhelmed by their surroundings. Yet, here stood one who seemed to defy those expectations, at least outwardly. The grand halls of the assembly were unlike anything Mason had ever seen. Towering columns of shimmering light extended to a ceiling so high it seemed to vanish into the ether. The architecture, a blend of advanced technology and ethereal artistry, made the human-designed buildings back on Earth seem primitive by comparison. Everywhere he looked, representatives of alien species engaged in discussions, their voices melding into a cacophony of strange languages, each one laced with tones and inflections foreign to human ears. But Mason showed no sign of being overwhelmed. Instead, he carried himself with a sense of purpose, his gaze steady and his stride unwavering. As Mason approached the central gathering, he caught the faint whispers from nearby alien delegates, their voices filled with a mixture of curiosity and scorn. One of the younger Zatari women, adorned in the finest silken garments, turned to her companion and laughed softly, her voice carrying just enough for Mason to hear. "Is this the great human warrior we've heard about?" she teased, her telepathic voice brushing against Mason's mind like a cool breeze. "I thought that would be taller." Her companions chuckled in agreement, their telepathic thoughts buzzing in unison, amplifying the mockery. Yet Mason gave no reaction to the jibe. His face remained impassive as he continued his approach, aware that every step he took was being scrutinized. He wasn't here to make friends or prove himself to the galaxy's elite. He had a mission, and his focus remained unshakable. The subtle tension in the air was palpable, but Mason's calm demeanor only served to deepen the curiosity among those watching. As Captain Mason walked through the halls of the Galactic Assembly, the alien whispers grew louder, telepathic murmurs rippling through the crowd like a silent wave. The Zatari, with their telepathic abilities, were especially amused, their laughter unspoken but felt in the air. It wasn't just a sound, it was a sensation, a mocking presence brushing against Mason's mind, as though invisible fingers were tugging at his thoughts, testing his reactions. The younger Zatari, in particular, found his very presence laughable. To them, humans were a species of no consequence, barely advanced enough to be allowed into the assembly, let alone stand among the galaxy's true powers. They communicated amongst themselves in intricate webs of thought, their telepathic voices intertwining in ways no human ear could hear. But Mason could feel the judgment in the way their gazes flickered toward him and in the subtle smiles that curled at the edges of their lips. One Zatari noblewoman, her silver hair cascading down her back in elegant waves, leaned closer to her companion. Without speaking, her thoughts reached out in a wave of telepathic derision, the energy of it washing over Mason like a cold breeze. "This is the human they send to represent their kind," her voice echoed through the ether. Look how small he is, how primitive. Her companion, a tall Zatari male with skin the color of molten silver, nodded, his telepathic laughter a soft pulse in the air. They barely crawl out of their own atmosphere, and yet they believe they belong here among us. His gaze lingered on Mason's uniform, a crude patchwork of fabrics compared to the flowing, energy-infused garments worn by the Assembly's elite. The telepathic laughter spread, others joining in with their own private thoughts, creating an unspoken chorus of mockery. Mason could sense the undercurrent of it all, an invisible thread of contempt that wound its way through the assembly like a collective mind intent on belittling him. The Zatari women, in particular, seemed to relish the mockery, their telepathic remarks sharp and cutting. They found the human form unrefined, his broad shoulders and rugged appearance at odds with the sleek and slender elegance that defined their own species. "You can see why they call them brutes," one of the younger Zatari women commented, her telepathic voice laced with amusement. She let her gaze sweep over Mason, her eyes lingering just long enough to make her disdain obvious. "They lack the finesse of a truly advanced species." Another noblewoman, this one older and more reserved, added her voice to the mental conversation, though her tone was not as overtly mocking. "I've heard stories of their military conquests. It seems inefficient. They rely on brute force rather than strategy." Her thoughts were directed to Mason, probing gently at his surface emotions, searching for a reaction that might confirm her opinion. Mason's mental barriers held firm. Years of training had taught him how to withstand telepathic intrusion, and though the Zatari's psychic touch was far more delicate than what he had experienced in combat, it was still invasive. He could feel their laughter not just in his ears, but in his mind, a sensation that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness, probing for weakness. Despite the barrage of telepathic mockery swirling around him, Captain Alex Mason remained unfazed, his posture unyielding and his expression calm. He stood taller, his gaze focused ahead as though the telepathic waves of disdain were nothing more than a passing breeze. The Zatari, who expected the usual submissiveness or awkward unease that many younger species displayed in the presence of such superior telepaths, found themselves puzzled by his unwavering composure. There was no hesitation in his steps, no flicker of doubt in his eyes. He moved through the grand assembly halls as if he belonged there, as if the weight of their judgments was insignificant. His confidence wasn't born of arrogance, but from an inner strength that the Zatari had not anticipated. It was as though he carried a secret, one that shielded him from the biting mental barbs and kept him centered in the midst of their collective scrutiny. As the telepathic waves continued to ripple, more and more Zatari took notice. They began probing him deeper, searching for cracks in his mental armor, expecting the human's facade to falter. Yet, Mason's thoughts remained shielded, not through any psychic power of his own, but through sheer will. His mind was a fortress, built brick by brick through years of hardship and discipline. His confidence radiated outward, an aura of quiet power that even the most skilled telepaths found unsettling. Some of the younger Zatari, who had been laughing the loudest, began to pull back slightly, confusion flickering in their eyes. The invisible tendrils of their telepathy recoiled from Mason as if they had encountered something far more complex than they had anticipated. It wasn't just that he wasn't breaking under their psychic pressure. It was that he seemed utterly unaffected by it. The Zatari, who prided themselves on their ability to mentally manipulate and unsettle others, were met with something they had rarely experienced: resistance. One of the senior telepaths, a counselor with deep violet eyes and a regal bearing, attempted a more direct mental assault, reaching into Mason's mind with the finesse of a surgeon. But what he found there was unexpected. Mason's thoughts, far from the primitive chaos he had assumed, were sharp, disciplined, and organized. His mental landscape was not the fractured, emotional mess of a lesser species, but a calm, controlled storm, a place of steel will and iron focus. The counselor withdrew quickly, his telepathic touch recoiling as if he had encountered something dangerous. The telepathic atmosphere in the hall began to shift, the once mocking undertones now giving way to a quiet curiosity. Whispers of intrigue spread among the assembly, as the aliens began to wonder what kind of human could maintain such composure under their combined scrutiny. The air in the chamber thickened as the telepathic clash between Captain Alex Mason and the Za'Tari counselor escalated. What had begun as a subtle probe into the human's mind quickly evolved into an unspoken battle of wills. The counselor, a being of vast telepathic prowess and centuries of experience, pushed deeper into Mason's consciousness, determined to break through the strange calm that surrounded the human like a shield. His psychic tendrils wove through the layers of Mason's thoughts, seeking any sign of weakness, any crack in the fortress that might expose vulnerability. But instead of finding the chaos and disarray he expected from a human mind, the counselor was met with something foreign, an order, a structure that mirrored the discipline of a seasoned warrior. Every thought, every emotion was compartmentalized, locked away behind barriers of willpower that the Za'Tari had not anticipated. It was not a chaotic battlefield of thoughts, but rather a well-guarded fortress, with walls so thick and impenetrable that even the counselor, with all his skill, found himself struggling to breach them. Mason, for his part, felt the pressure mounting in his mind, the invasive touch of the Za'Tari trying to pry deeper, to uncover what lay hidden beneath the surface. But he did not resist in the traditional sense. He did not push back or attempt to shield his thoughts with force. Instead, he simply endured. His mind remained steady, unyielding, and resolute, as if he had faced worse than this before. Years of training, of discipline, of learning to control his mind and body under extreme duress had prepared him for moments like this. He let the Za'Tari counselor push, let him dig, all while keeping his mental defenses strong and silent. The counselor, however, was growing frustrated. What had initially seemed like an easy mental domination of a lesser species was turning into a grueling struggle. He increased his efforts, sending waves of telepathic pressure crashing against Mason's mind like tidal waves against a stone cliff. Each wave struck with force, but none penetrated. Each assault was repelled by the human's unwavering will, and each failure only deepened the counselor's determination. Other Za'Tari in the room sensed the shift in energy. They, too, began to feel the weight of the clash, though they could not perceive the full extent of the struggle taking place within the invisible psychic arena. Whispers spread through the assembly, as eyes turned toward the human, who stood, outwardly calm, but locked in a battle that few could truly understand. The tension in the room became palpable, as the Za'Tari telepaths who had once mocked Mason now looked on with growing unease. The counselor redoubled his efforts, reaching deeper into the reserves of his telepathic power, sending waves of psychic energy into Mason's mind in a final bid to overwhelm him. But no matter how hard he pressed, no matter how deep he reached, he could not break through. The human's mind was a fortress, unyielding, impenetrable, and unwavering in the face of his assault. It was as if Mason's thoughts were bound by an unshakable core of resolve that could not be touched, let alone broken. The clash continued, an unspoken war of mental strength, as the Za'Tari counselor found himself in a battle he had never expected. What had once been mockery had turned into something far more serious, and now the counselor could feel the weight of his own failure looming over him. As the telepathic struggle wore on, the room's atmosphere began to shift. What had started as an air of superiority and casual disdain from the Za'Tari was now tinged with growing concern. The Za'Tari council members, who had once been so sure of their dominance over the human, exchanged uneasy glances. The mocking smiles faded from their faces as they watched their most powerful telepath strain against an opponent they had vastly underestimated. The confidence they had displayed earlier, born from centuries of perceived intellectual and telepathic superiority, wavered as the realization took root. The human, the being they had dismissed as weak and primitive, stood unmoved, while their champion faltered. The Za'Tari, who prided themselves on their mental acuity and telepathic abilities, had never encountered resistance like this from any other species, let alone one as young and technologically underdeveloped as humanity. The subtle hum of telepathic communication between the counselors began to fray, the once fluid and confident connections becoming jagged with uncertainty. They had seen telepathic duels before, but never one where the challenger stood so effortlessly against their champion. The Zatari's perception of humans, previously seen as mere physical beings without mental prowess, began to unravel. Whispers of confusion flickered through their minds as they tried to reconcile their previous assumptions with the display unfolding before them. This wasn't the brute strength or barbarism they had come to expect from human encounters. This was something far more unsettling, a quiet resilience, a hidden strength of will that defied their understanding. To them, telepathy was a delicate art, a subtle game of finesse and power that they had perfected over millennia. Yet here stood a human, silent, composed, and seemingly immune to their most potent weapon. The Zatari counselors, who had previously treated the situation as little more than a formality, now watched with bated breath. Their confidence in their telepathic superiority faltered as they realized that, in this moment, the human had not only met their challenge, but had shifted the balance of power without uttering a word.